Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Achieving Compliance, Pharma Annual Deadlines. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank ReadTech, who developed the content for this presentation. ReadTech is the provider of best-in-class information-based solutions and services to meet the needs of the life sciences industry, government agencies, and the intellectual property market. Their customers are located throughout the world and include a wide range of medical device manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies, the U.S. government, numerous patent authorities, and IP-driven companies and law firms. The corporate mission is to advance humanity by delivering better outcomes to the innovation community. ReadTech is a LexisNexis company. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your speakers for today's webinar. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Gary Sainer. He is the Senior Manager of Information Solutions at ReadTech. He is a subject matter expert on pharmaceutical structured product labeling and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He has over 30 years of experience in software development, process management, and data administration, with the last 15 years focused on the life sciences industry. He serves as a co-chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the Medical Devices Group. Next, I'd like to introduce you to David Wilson, Senior Account Executive with ReadTech. And David assists pharmaceutical companies to achieve compliance through innovative technologies. ReadTech serves customers with the expertise required in the life sciences industry. The services and software tools they provide as part of their pharmaceutical services have assisted over 1,000 pharma companies in complying with complex FDA electronic drug listing, labeling, and registration requirements. Now it's my pleasure to pass over the mic and the controls over to Gary. So Gary, when you're ready, you may begin.
Well, thank you very much, Sonia. And we'd like to get off on a good start here with a review of some of the annual deadlines in the pharmaceutical space for the drug products. Here are some topics that we're going to be covering. There's a number of items that we'd like to touch on today. So there's a overview of the annual deadlines, and there's a pretty busy calendar on the regulatory agenda. There is then a focus in on the year-end requirements, and we'll go into some of the structured product labeling requirements and some data storage management, and do those Q&A at the end. David and I will be interacting, going back and forth for various sections and comments. So let's get started, David, and I'll cover some basic background on some of the annual deadlines that the FDA has in place. I'll go through these rather quickly. You can always refer back to these materials when you download those, either the recording or the PowerPoint pages, and that would allow you to do a little bit deeper dive and investigation. If you look at some of the requirements, and these are only the tip of the iceberg, so there's a lot of things that need to be done in rolling out a drug product and maintaining it over the course of time. We're going to focus in on those middle three: the establishment registration, the product listing, and the labeling. There are some requirements there that need to take place, and we'll focus on some of the details. Most of those particular documents and reports need to be packaged in a structured product labeling format. So just for a little bit of background in case those are new to that particular identification. The structural product labeling is this document markup standard approved by HL7 and adopted by the FDA to exchange information back and forth. Now, if you're not aware, HL7 is a standards developing organization. So Health Level 7 has this definition of the document, things that you can use to capture information in, various tags and so on. It is XML based, but there is a schema that is provided by HL7. Now that particular platform can support many different documents, just like Word, Microsoft Word, for example. You can write a memo, you can write a letter, you can write instructions. There's many types of documents that can be written off the very same platform. FDA has various implementation guides and dedicated control vocabularies and something called a style sheet to render that information in that document in a browser. So over the course of time, the FDA had implemented a particular standard for a NDC labeler code request, and that uses SPL. And then there is this establishment registration that also uses the very same format, but different set of rules. And then as we get into a little bit more detail today, there is labeling and listing submissions that again use the SPL. We will go into the full roadmap over the course of time, but if you take a look here, you'll see that the FDA has layered on from the original implementation of an SPL for various documents. Over the course of time, I think there's about 50 different document types that are able to be created, and the FDA has defined based on SPL. So one of the ones that we'll be touching on today, for example, is the SPL certification for blanket no change. That came out in 2017. So we have a good 4 years of history using that particular standard. In the future, I want to make you aware of a couple. The SPL for REMS, the Risk Evaluation Mitigation Strategy, we'll touch on that just for a second, just to make sure it's on your radar in the future. And then there's some other documents that the FDA is considering, XML-based, that might actually use a Health Level 7 different standard called FHIR. We'll save that for another webinar. If we take some of these particular documents and lay them out on a calendar from January to December, you'll see that many of these have report dates, anniversary dates, if you will, during the course of the year. In the event that you have a biologic product, vaccine, making something, vaccine for the flu or whatever, there is a special requirement to report your lot distribution data, so the production counts. Typically that's 6 months, and on this particular calendar, we use February and August simply as an example. That's not fixed, but it's based on in your particular drug product and engagement with the FDA. There's also an April 1st deadline to report the samples that you had distributed out to physicians and clinics and so on. That's XML based, not SPL in particular, but keep that in mind. It starts to fill up the calendar. And then for those generic drug manufacturers, you do need to report your facility with this self-identification requirement in the month of May. And then I'll jump to the last quarter, where those establishment registrations need to be reported. Either you submit an update or you submit a no change document, but either case, you have to tell the FDA that you're still alive and well, and it's either no change or here are the changes for my establishment. For the drug listing and labeling, the FDA does indicate that if you have a significant major labeling change over the course of a year, that you report that whenever that occurs. But then there's 2 additional months here in the month of June and the month of December, where you specifically have to take a review, see if there's any updates, and make an update to your labeling or listing document. Now, in the event that you had made a change, then you don't have to certify to the FDA that there's no change. But if everything was fine, it was pretty static, no particular changes going on, then a blanket no change certification. Again, you need to let the FDA know that this drug product is still in the market, it's alive and well, it has not gone inactive, and you're not delisting it. So there's a couple things that you want to keep in mind there. Now, before we go too far, I want to back up and just touch a little bit on this REMS. There was a document, a guidance. It was actually a draft guidance that came out in 2017. There was a pilot that occurred, and basically the information about those 80 or so drug products that are high risk, but yet they do have some benefits, and the FDA wants to make sure there's a plan to make sure that they're used safely. So typically this has been used, or the information, the plan has been packaged in a PDF. But now there is an initiative to capture that information in XML using SPL in particular. So finally, the long-awaited final guidance for industry came out in December of last year, and basically that put everything in place, and it also started a timer for 2 years. And now the end of next year, December of next year, in the event that you have a new or modified REMS document, you will have to use SPL. So just make sure that's on your calendar. I know it doesn't affect everyone in the audience, but if it does, you definitely want to make sure that you're in tune with what the requirements are for submission updates or coming out with a new REMS. The other little point I'll highlight here is in regard to Health Canada. So across the border to the north, we have a initiative going on, and that uses SPL as a platform. They refer to their particular initiative for product monographs as XML product monograph. So this initially going to be rolled out with prescription drugs, not over the counter, but they're taking I look at how they would be able to migrate, again, PDF submitted format into XML using all the advantages of the technology of XML. So they actually had some history going back to 2020. And before, there was a phase 1 where you could do some limited production, but we're currently at the end of 2021 now in phase 2. So you are actually able to submit a product monograph in XML format to Health Canada. And that we believe will migrate, get a little bit more firm, most likely, no firm date yet, but most likely in latter half of 2022, it might be required whenever you submit a new or a changed product monograph. So keep that in the back of your mind, keep it, and if you're involved in those, you definitely want to start gathering information, participate in pilots, and certainly jump on those voluntary offerings. With that, Sonia, I think we're ready for a poll question. Are you able to run that for us?
There certainly will, and I will launch it right now. And this is done in real time, audience members. So please, your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. So the first poll question that we have for our audience members is here. The question is, now or in the future, my company will need to submit, and please select all that apply from below. You have the FDA establishment registration, FDA drug labeling, listing, blanket, no change certification, FDA REMS in SPL, Health Canada XML product monograph, or none of the above. So please go ahead and cast your votes. I'll give you a few more seconds to complete this poll question. Then I will share the results once I close the polls. Okay, it looks like we have the majority of our audience members have cast their votes, so thank you very much for that. And for those of you who have not, I'll give you a few more seconds to complete the poll. Just select on any of the below options. Okay, that looks like it's a majority of our audience members, so thank you very much for participating. Now let's take a look at the results of our first poll question. And the question again was, now or in the future, my company will need to submit, and we have the results here. We have 81% saying FDA establishment registration, 93% are saying FDA drug labeling, listing, blanket, no change certification, 22% are saying FDA REMS and SPL, 41% are saying Health Canada XML product monograph, and then we have only 4% at none of the above. Okay, now back to the presentation.
David, do you want to pick up at this point and give us some details about those fourth quarter activities, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. Thanks. So yeah, as Gary had mentioned, this last couple of months here with the year, the mad scramble or dash to get these primary registrations through to FDA to ensure compliance in future years. So the ER, that being our drug manufacturing facility registrations, right? Now that information is then referenced in the subsequent other files, the drug listings and blanket no change certifications. So if there are any type of hiccups with that, it could lead to issues. So why don't you go on to the next slide here, Gary, and we'll talk about each of those a little bit more in depth as we go through. But before we do, I wanted to give a snapshot of where this all ends up, right? The information that is submitted to FDA goes to various different locations, but primarily the drug listing data and the blanket no change certification data, which we'll dig into a lot more as we go through the presentation, ends up in one of the main resources being the FDA's NDC directory. So the link right's there in the source above. Now, you can actually search the National Drug Code Directory by just entering information into their search bar by clicking on that link there. The next arrow here will point us to some database files. I really like the database files, right? This shows you everything in one large either text file or Excel spreadsheet. For simplicity purposes and ease of viewing, I extracted some information in the next couple of slides that I believe was pretty compelling to talk to in Excel and tables. So we have the NDC database file. This is all active products that are active with FDA, and these are all finished products. Then the unfinished drug database, this is going to show us those products that are active pharmaceutical ingredients, drugs for further processing, bulk products like that. So not necessarily the products that might have the label slapped on it and goes out to a patient or a consumer. And then the NDC database excluded file, or what I like to call the naughty list, is the list of products or NDC codes that have at one point or another not been properly certified through the next year. So you don't necessarily want data showing up on there. So Gary, yeah, next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the active files. So really looking at this table here, this is representative of all of the products, NDC product codes that are active with the FDA. I separated them by product category, lumped some of them together because they weren't huge number of products, but a grand total is 123,280 active products today. 44,674 of them end up in this kind of middle of December 31st to the delisted, which these are products that have either been updated this year or in a previous year and are compliant through to next year, or through the future of the products being on the database in the delisted perspective. Delisted, this is when an SPL file has essentially been marked for removal from FDA's database because it is no longer being marketed. The reason it might still show up is the marketing end date of the product, or what many use as being the last date of expiry of a lot that was manufactured might still show up in the database. But really what I really wanted to focus on is that first column or the middle December 31st column of 2021. This is representative of all their 78,000 plus NDC product codes that still have to be certified this year. So that's a lot, right? It's close, over 50% of the NDC codes that are registered with FDA still have to be updated. Now that's to be expected, right? The reporting period just opened up, 6 days ago? So, I'm not expecting everyone to have their blanket no change certifications ready to go right away. But what it does show us is there's a lot to be done. Some high level things that I found to be really interesting. There are over 8,000 companies in the NDC directory that have 5 products or less, and that represent 8,500 products of this. So what does that mean? There's a lot of organizations who have a lot more than 5 products. So as you start reviewing this information and what we talk about what you have to certify year over year, that gets pretty compelling. And then there are over 2,600 companies with one single product. So 2,600 of those products, that's your only product out there. And we're here to help you understand what you need to do for the certification period. But yeah, Gary, why don't we move along to the expired database file that we extracted. Great.
Yep.
So This is our industry report card and expired products. On the right, we're showing a list of kind of the organizations that have the highest number of total expired products. There are 44,000 expired NDC product codes in FDA's database still. We'll talk a little later about expired versus delisted and the difference. But what you'll see on the left here is a summary, and I listed it out this way by compliance date because you'll see industry, you're doing a great job of minimizing the number of expired products year over year over year. 2017, we expected this number to be a lot higher because FDA's intention of creating this process was to ensure any organizations who were just not even in business anymore, products that weren't even on the market anymore, got wiped out and removed from the database. That could very well be why some of these companies have thousands of products up there, right? But as we see, there are year over year more and more of these. And you really want to try to ensure if you're still operating as a business, if you still have drug products on the market, you want to clean this up and get these removed, and you can. And we'll talk a little bit how you can do that in just a moment. Great, so Sonia, I believe that brings us up to our next poll question. Is that right, Gary?
Yes, it is. Okay, I will launch poll question number 2 for our audience members to engage in, and they should see it appear on their screen right now. And there it is. So just like before, it's done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. And I'll leave you about 40 seconds to complete this simple poll question. And the question that we have for you is, does your company have any expired NDC product codes? So you have 4 to select from below, so just click on all that apply to you. One is yes, no, I'm unsure, or I need help determining. Okay, that looks like it's everyone. Thank you so much for everyone for participating. I'm going to close the polls now. All right, so let's take a look at the results here. Does your company have any expired NDC product codes? And we have here 10% that are saying yes, 55% saying no. Then we have 32% saying I am unsure, and then 3% saying I need help determining. So thank you everyone for participating in poll number 2. Now back to you, Gary and David.
Great, thanks, Sonia. And that's to be expected. It's confusing and tough to find this information. Over time, FDA has redacted a lot of it. So, Gary, why don't we slide through the next slide here? And what we'll really talk about in these next 2 slides is this end of year reporting period. Now that we've reviewed some of the data, what needs to be done, right? So with the manufacturing facility establishment registrations, what are we reporting to the agency? Are there any updates to be reported with our facility registration? Are any locations being deregistered, right? Did we have multiple locations referenced on our file and now we have to maybe remove one of them because it's no longer active? The last couple of years has taken a toll on a lot of organizations, whether it be due to the pandemic or due to OMUFA fees, right? Needing the need to close out certain locations because of just business needs, and then out of business notification. So those are a little different. One would be if you're just deregistering maybe a single site, while out of business notification would really be kind of wiping all of the sites out, or the only site you may have registered. Now, other things to think of is the name changing on the facility due to whether it be an acquisition or a merger. All these things you want to ensure that you keep accurate and up to date, and they then have a very significant impact on the drug listing files and blanket no change files beyond them. The other piece would be in contact information. Is the person who was registered on these files still there? Even importers of reference, if product or APIs are being imported from overseas and you have a new importer, you should be updating that before that product starts to get to reach our borders here in the States. So yeah, next slide, Gary. Great. Now, what this slide talks a bit about is then the drug listing process and the actual product registrations, if you will. These are the registrations that are going through that are getting those NDC codes populated into the directory, or the label that's going through, the entire file being viewable in a human readable format in the National Library of Medicine's DailyMed. Are there any labeling changes in this calendar year, right? Did we rebrand our carton container labeling or our principal display panel? Was there a change in company name or contact information, right? Sometimes something as simple as your phone number that you should reach out to in the event of something, some type of event with the product. Are there content or drug fact updates that need to be made, right? These are all things that you'll have to update before the end of the year. Are there any listing updates? When I say listing, the data elements or the metadata of the file. So is there a new packaging level that's been introduced to the supply chain? A lot of different listing updates could occur. You want to ensure that if they're happening, if anything's changing, making those changes. And then checking the manufacturing establishment, right? Did anything change from the previous year, from that previous slide, right? From any of our manufacturers we might work with if you contract out the manufacturing. And then delist. If a product is no longer being distributed, you should be delisting that product label listing. Now, if none of these apply, right? If nothing has changed, that's where we move towards, it's like the Monopoly game, right? You may pass go, and you may start your blanket no change certification file, which is a single bulk submission of all the NDC product codes that haven't had a change to any of the information that's been published to the FDAs through this process. Great. So, Gary, why don't you take us over that blanket no change certification process? Take us through the nitty gritty that we need to know when going through these rigorous projects at the end of the year.
Yeah. Okay. Very good, David. Thanks for the quick overview. Next series of slides will be specifically for that blanket no change and some of the detailed regulations about that. So we're going to do a little bit of review, question and answer type of interaction here, so that we can cover some of the information about BNCC. So the first one that we'll ask, and we get this question pretty often, what is this drug listing? What's it all about? If you've been doing it for 4 years, you probably can answer this without a hiccup. But for those that are new, basically it is for every active drug listing file that has not been previously listed or updated during the calendar year, must be certified to remain active for the following year. So the underlying phrase in the regulation is that this is basically a legal statement confirming all product data have been reviewed and deemed accurate and is up to date. So there's some ramification here that's just not a casual say, oh yeah, it's no changed. It's also a statement saying that whatever is there is accurate. So that is a little bit of a nuance you should be aware of, but basically you're saying that this has been reviewed and accurate, and then that it has to be submitted in that time frame. I think we talked about it. Next question, who must certify drug listings? Well, that becomes a really good question, a lot of finger pointing in many cases. So the establishment registration is the legal entity responsible for this particular activity to list and certify the drug products. So there could be any one of those items listed there. Manufacturers are typically the most involved, but there's some other operators and actors out there in the marketplace, depending on how they work with the products. I will highlight contract manufacturing organizations are the ones that are responsible to do the listing, but in many cases they coordinate with the private label distributor, and private label distributor gets involved doing some of this. So one of the things you want to make sure you avoid is that you don't have a duplicate certification. So if there is this interaction with the CMO and a private label distributor, make sure the particular drug product code only gets listed once. It is possible for some agents to act on your behalf. So they can submit, these authorized agents might be technically the U.S. agent or an importer, consultants, or other parties. Another question that we have frequently that comes up is what drug listings must be certified? So this is kind of a simple answer. It comes down to every active drug listing on file with the FDA. So there's a whole host of drug products in that list, all of which are candidates and need to be listed or need to be certified. Now down at the bottom, there's a quick note about veterinary products. So the animal health products use a little bit different means to do the certification. So if you do fall into that particular category, go ahead and follow that link and you can get more information about certifying your animal health products. Now, David touched on some of the criteria for a drug falling into this particular category of certification, but just to highlight those and recap those, your drug product was newly listed this year, or it was updated, or it was certified, any of those possibilities. And it's not delisted. So in this particular case, it's not discontinued, the marketing end date has not occurred, and it is not currently in an expired condition. So if you did not make the certification last year and now it's sitting as expired, you cannot certify that. There's other activities you actually have to resubmit the listing to get it out of that expired type of category. There's something called deficient, and that is an FDA term for some deficiency action that they have taken on a particular product, and also inactive, so it's not marked inactive by the FDA. So if you don't fall into any of those, you can continue to the next page. I don't think anyone's going to fall into this last requirement that the SPL format was used previously. So in the event you still have a most recent submission in paper or PDF, there's a lot of other things that you ought to be doing, but you have to submit the SPL in electronic format. All right, so the criteria continues. So then you have to look at all that. If it passed the items on the previous page, is this particular listing accurate and up to date? And that's not necessarily just a casual activity. There's a lot of information in the labeling narrative, the content of labeling, that has a lot of information in it. The product metadata, there's a lot of things that go on there. There might be some packaging levels and so on, changes throughout the course of the year, and also this principal display panel image. Make sure that's up to date. And that your most recent listing did pass the current validation rules. So one of the things that caused some confusion is you might have submitted a document roughly a year ago, and it passed listing validation at that point in time. And then during the course of this year, the FDA might have enforced some new validation rules. And you think, well, nothing really changed, so I'm going to put that in my certification list. The FDA does a current check against your particular document and see if it matches the current rules. So as of today, it might not pass. So there's this issue about being aware of what the FDA validation rules are changing over the course of time and whether it would affect your particular certification. And we'll talk about remediation in the event you find this particular error popping up. What data is included in a drug certification? So there's an identification of the submitting party, the authorized agent. So the company's identified with the DUNS number. There's a contact information, and then the actual data is surrounding the manufacturer establishment. So the company establishment name, their DUNS number, and a whole list of product codes. So you might actually have multiple establishment sites you package together in one certification file. And at a particular establishment site, you might have multiple NDC product codes. So all that is able to be done and packaged together. How do you certify a drug listing? So the actual mechanics of going about this blanket no change submission. So there are some guidelines in building the SPL document, and if you're familiar with the XML requirements and the FDA's requirements, you'll recognize term that is something called a document type. So there's a dedicated document type and a tag referred to as a LOINC code. So there's particular code associated with that document type. And then there's some other attributes about something called a set ID and document ID, and there's versions and so on. So if you're building SPL, you'll need to understand some of those pieces of metadata about the submission, and then obviously include the registered data and the establishment data that we just talked about. and then you can go ahead and submit. Now, this is a standalone SPL submission to the Office of the Commissioner. It's not part of a ECTD submission, so there's no particular supplement or whatever that you need to put in play for this. Most of these particular SPL documents are submitted by way of the electronic submission gateway. So you redirect that to the Office of the Commissioner. Now, there are a number of methods that you can use to actually make that transfer to the FDA. So some companies sitting on here on the left-hand side of the diagram, they need to transfer that data that they capture, prepare it into a SPL document, and then submit it to the FDA to the right. And as David had mentioned earlier, that information at the FDA, once it's approved and meets all the checks and validation, is made public. So you'll see that information in the NDC directory, you'll see it in the NSDE file list, and you'll see it also in the National Library of Medicine Daily Med. Now, the actual method that you use to create that SPL, there's multiple ways. You could use service, you could use in-house staff, recommend some type of a tool to help you do that. Writing this document in XML, it takes some expertise, and there's vendor tools out there. You might have an internal tool that was made. The FDA offers some tools as well. You can look up the FDA X forms and make use of that, or refer to something called the CEDAR Direct tool. And all of these, the output of that activity will be an SPL file. The first three make use of the electronic submission gateway to communicate that data to the FDA. The last one has this SPL direct connection to the database, and that SPL file is then reviewed by the FDA. The other question is about the timing, and I think we touched on that pretty well. David hit that. It's this last quarter. Just a quick side note, though, any submissions prior to October 1 or after December 31st are not valid. So it does have to be in this window. So in this case, 2 weeks early doesn't count. I mean, you get no extra credit for being early. In fact, it'll be invalid. So make sure that all those submissions are inside that particular time frame on the calendar. A little bit of information here. Let's cover about the actual procedure that the FDA follows in checking a drug certification. So there's various levels of a check when it comes into the FDA. And if you kind of are aware of these, you can kind of plan for them and make sure that you're covered. So the first level is basically confirm that the file is a valid SPL file, meaning that it's formed correctly. There's no errors in the rules of creating an SPL document. So there's tags, open tags and closed tags and so on. And it follows the schema that the Health Level 7 had put in place, and everything about the implementation guide is followed. Moving on to the second layer, then the particular product codes that are inserted there, are they valid numbers? Are they making sure that the FDA will make sure that they're not delisted, they're not expired, they're not deficient, not inactive, the items that we had talked about before. So these are active product codes, NDC product codes in good standing. And then third level is, does these particular SPL listing files that are identified by these product codes, will they pass the current SPL validation rules? So each one of those product codes will be found and associated to a particular listing, and the FDA does this cross-check, and then they go out and find the actual listing file and do perform a current set of validation against that particular file. And then the last layer, there is also establishments that are referred inside those listing files. So you might get down to this layer, past everything, but in your most recent listing file, you are now pointing to an establishment that was not registered for this year. So now that brings up an error, and that can be real serious, because the question is, what if a drug certification fails? Now, even if you had listed 100 different product codes representing maybe 20 different establishments, if any error is found, then the whole file is marked as a failure, as a reject. And none of the items, none of the listed product codes will be certified. So that is a very important piece of feedback that you want to monitor, make sure that you are successful in making this submission and it passes all the validation rules. The remediation in the event that there is this error code and the whole file fails. Now, you'll want to go back, identify that particular error. So there's some acknowledgments that come back from the FDA pointing you to where the error was found. And then if necessary, you can do a couple things here. One is you can remove that NDC code and then resubmit the SPL and take care of 99% of all the codes except for that one. But when you go about doing that, you'll definitely want to update the doc ID. Don't change the set ID. In this particular case, you're going to be updating the version. So you're going to basically overwrite what was previously sent to the FDA, and then you can resubmit. Now you have one or more of these reject NDC codes to address. And there could be multiple reasons. One is the drug listing is erroneous, or it might be the corresponding establishment is not valid. So there's a couple different means that you might need to follow, different trails, basically, depending on the particular error that caused this whole file to be rejected initially.
Yeah, Gary, and I'll point out real quick, another thing we see pretty commonly is the updating of these technical files, right? The labeler code registration file. A lot of times FDA will send communication to the point of contact listed on the labeler code. And some of those data deficiencies you may have out there that may have ended your NDC product code to go into the expired list. When we were showing that table at the beginning, there are a couple hundred NDC codes that are on the expired list for this year, which means FDA has been flagging some of those. So if you don't have that labeler code update, that could lead to missing communication and correspondence from the agency that you may not have known that file was, or that product was ending up there. So yeah, that's just another point behind all of this, is always making sure these SPL files that you're reviewing get that proper review near the end of the year and as early as possible in the end of the year, so that way you can accommodate any remediation that Gary's showing here. Yeah,
I'll use this opportunity to mention the data in the appendix. So if you go ahead and download the content, the materials have rather large appendix with a lot more detail. So there's 8 error codes or 8 particular conditions that you want to avoid. These are common errors that people make. So as part of your education, you might want to touch on those error codes. And there's a lot of additional information about this whole process. There's actually a little plan and flow chart about working your way through the system. We don't have time to go into all that during the webinar, but I will make a plug for the appendix. There's a lot of good material in that, and thank you, David. That happens more than we like to mention, yeah. But every once in a while, you get caught in that loop, and it's like, oh man, yeah. I can only get this particular. Yeah, if
good
I can
plug,
only get
Gary, because you've spent a lot of time on that appendix.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's do one other question here, and then we'll move on. So the other question that we get is, what if my drug listing is not certified? I missed the deadline. Oh my goodness, whatever came up, and who knows? I don't have this drug or many drug products listed. I didn't make it by the December 31st deadline. So what immediately happens, January 1, the FDA marks that product code as expired. Now, what's the impact of expired flag? And it means a couple things. One is officially, you're violating the regulations, so technically you're misbranded. I don't know of any fines that have been levied as a result of that, but you're in this category that you want to avoid. The other thing that is important is that the product is marked expired in the NDC directory. So this is a public database, and now this particular product is marked as expired. And anyone can access it. Even Dave Wilson goes over there and accesses the NDC directory and notes that these particular product codes are expired. So you want to avoid, that public, notice. The other thing that happens is that these particular products then are removed from the NSDE file. So this is a file that the FDA puts together. It's the file that CMS actually uses for reimbursement. So this could have serious impact on your business and revenue activity. So again, there's another good reason not to go into that expired category. It's also noted on DailyMed that this particular product is now expired. So you want to move away from expired status to the correction. And as I mentioned earlier, that most of the time you'll need to submit drug listing updates. You might have to submit a establishment registration and go back. Now you can submit another certificate, blanket no change SPL for certification, and only include those corrected one or more product codes. So if that does happen to get over the course of time, you can submit break this big bulk file apart and do portions of it. And now realize that if your correction was to resubmit a drug listing, then you actually satisfy the requirement for this year and that you've submitted an update. So you would not have to submit an update to a drug listing and also have it certified thereafter. So the drug listing update would meet the requirements for this year. David, talk to us a little bit about this expired and delist definition. What's going on there?
Yeah. So expired. This is essentially those products that didn't properly get certified in a previous year or have a data discrepancy that FDA has flagged and moved to the expired list. So these are products that, in order to get them certified for any future years, or get them back onto the active list, you have to make a drug listing update. Now, delisted is when you're actually removing a product from the FDA's NDC directory, moving it to their archives because the product is no longer in commercial distribution or has been marked to be no longer in commercial distribution. So the FDA has been pretty clear in saying they don't want you using this expired option as being a lazy way to delist. Back when the last SPL Jamboree was hosted, and it was at the kickoff of this kind of blanket no change project. So those are two very different distinctions. One is the right way to do it and delisting it properly. Ending up on the expired list isn't necessary. Like I said, I like to call it the naughty list. So it isn't necessarily the place you want those product codes to end up. Yeah, but and really the way that a lot of organizations, if you kind of go to the next slide, Gary, manage a lot of this is really using a lot of these databases FDA provides to us, but that shows us what FDA sees, right? There may have been changes internally, changes to information. One of the questions that actually came through was asking when in an establishment, one of the first questions we got through the panel here, when an establishment or drug product is updated during the year, right? So this is actually a great opportunity to kind of paint that picture for you and answer that question all in one. So when you're reviewing your portfolio throughout the year, if you found, oh wait, one of our manufacturer's establishment registrations did change and that potentially affected a handful of products. Well, in that scenario, you will need to update the drug listings, submit those through to the FDA, and then the NDC codes that were affected by those changes don't necessarily have to be included in your end of year blanket no change certification, because in FDA's technical files, it will satisfy that requirement and it will certify them through to the next year when you update it in this calendar year. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is anything you're updating this year certifies it through 2022 of next year, or December 31st, 2022. But really the main point, as Gary mentioned, our appendix has some great information about an action plan that we've put together, really developing that action plan to make sure you can review your portfolio, review the establishment facilities that things are being manufactured at, and all of the product label listings, and then executing on that plan. And then after you've executed that plan, made your updates, submitted your blanket no change certification, verifying was this successful, right? Double checking FDA's database, seeing if there were anything to be remediated. In the advantages, really what we have done with a lot of our clients who have had these changes that may have impacted many products, or even if it's a reasonable number of products, but just making this process easier is implementing a data management tool to do this. And in ReadTech, we provide the single source for drug products, which allows our clients to really help manage that data. So Gary, if you go to the next slide, it'll really show what Gary had mentioned earlier in the flow of information, but with ReadTech in the middle here. And our software tool allows you to manage all of that data, all the listing information, the data elements, all the existing SPL files that are there, and then review them. And then we also provide the navigator for drug labels, which allows organizations to compare drug labels, review drug labels, and research different drug labels, whether it's your own drug labels or not. Now, the one thing I did want to point out through all of this is contract manufacturers, you have it a bit more difficult, right? And that's where single source is very useful. Contract manufacturers' drug listings that are X type of drug product manufactured under contract SPL types are not published to the public in that NDC directory. So it makes that review of what you see in the public very difficult because you can't see it in the public domain, right? So that's where having this type of application as a contract manufacturer puts all of that information in a centralized, secure location where you can have that actionable intelligence to understand, do we need to update something? Should it be submitted independently as a drug listing? Or can we create a blanket no change certification out of that? So yeah, Gary, that really covers really what I wanted to focus on with the data management. I believe we have a last poll question, and then we can kind of get to some of the questions that have been asked here in the presentation so far.
Certainly, I will now launch our final poll question for our audience members to engage in, and there it is. And the question we have for you is, who is responsible for your company's data management and submissions? So please go ahead and select from the below: internal employees, contract manufacturer, ReadTech, or another third-party vendor. So please go ahead and cast your votes. Perfect. All right, now I'm going to close the polls and share the results with everyone. Oh, looks like we have a few more people there. Sorry, go ahead. All right, perfect. Now I've closed the polls. Okay, let's take a look at the results and who is responsible for your company's data management and submission. And we have here 64% are saying internal employees, 0% are saying contract manufacturers. We got 32% saying ReadTech, and then another 4% saying another third-party vendor. So thank you everyone for participating in our last poll. Now back to Gary and David.
Great, thanks.
Sonia, I believe that we're at the end of this little presentation, and I'd like to go over some of the question and answers or questions that we have, and David and I will provide some answers for them.
Oh, certainly. Okay, perfect. I will then jump into our Q&A portion of the webinar. So remember, audience members, you can send in your questions by using that questions window, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the time we have together. Now, I'm just going to look here and see. We have a bunch of questions coming through. We got 5 minutes left. So let's see how many we can get through. So let's look at our first question. And the first question is, hold on one second here. Let me just get them all lined up as they're all still coming through. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, we're looking for the first one here, and it's here. If my drug has a past marketing end date and completed status, does it need to be certified?
Yeah.
The quick answer is
right. Great question. The answer is no. So by adding delisting, essentially adding a marketing end date and completed status, it removes it from the requirement of having to be blanket no changed, and it'll actually remove the date of the certified through completely from the directory. And then once the product is reaches that end date in the file, it's completely removed from the public's view in there.
Okay, perfect. Let me go on to the next question here. If SPL product labeling is submitted in September, and do I still need to do blank change modification?
It sounds like they did a labeling update in September, so it's outside the fourth quarter. But the fact that you did a labeling update in the calendar year, then you do not have to include that product code in the listing certification. Or yeah.
And the only thing I'd add to that is while you don't have to add it to the blanket note change, if anything did change to the labeling, which it probably didn't, you might want to update it if anything did change from September till December 31st.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, let's go on to our next question here. This audience member is asking, when an establishment or drug product is updated during the year, are they not included in the blanket no change certification?
So I think that's related to the other question, the previous question, David.
It's pretty close.
So
yeah.
if there is, yeah, but it also applies if that you had submitted a labeling update or a listing update, then you do not have to include those product codes in the end of the year BNC.
Now you can, it will still pass, but you don't have to.
All right.
Are you going to
it's like belts and suspenders. You got both covered,
Yeah.
But you might want to keep that in mind for next year, though.
Yeah, and I mean, some organizations look at it as, well, I might keep a master list of all my NDC codes.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so it just makes it easier to submit them all, knowing that they're all still compliant. So.
All right, I'm going to squeeze in one more question. Is establishment registration apply only when company have manufacturing facility in the U.S.? Is this correct?
So no, any manufacturer of a drug product that is distributed in the United States must, by FDA's rules, regulations, and laws, be registered with a manufacturing facility establishment registration file. Okay. So to answer it, I guess, and clarify, if it's a organization outside of the U.S., you still have to do facility registrations. And in fact, if you're trying to ship a product into the U.S. that is a drug and it is not registered, it will very likely not get past Customs and Border Patrol. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, David and Gary, for that. Well, thank you very much for those questions. We have reached the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar. And if we couldn't attend to your questions, and there's a bunch of them there, the team at ReTech will follow up with you after this presentation. And if you have any further questions, there's the email address right there, pharma@retech.com, and the phone number 215-557-3010. Okay, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive of this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, in a few seconds, I'm going to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event with that link, and also share this link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that too. Now, get even more out of today's presentation by downloading the supporting materials that are available under the Handouts tab, and there's two there for you. One is called ReTech Drug Listing Data Sheet, and the other is ReTech Pharmaceutical Solutions. So please go ahead and check them out. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers again, Gary and David, for that very insightful presentation and for answering your questions. So thank you again, David and Gary.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X-Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Bye, everyone. Bye. Bye, Gary. Bye, David. Bye, everyone.
See ya.